maybe people in my house should listen to me more often then. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this breakout session. I'm going to read what they've written for me, and I should put my glasses on because I can't read if I don't have them on. We're going to be talking about municipal communications in the realm of emergency communications. We have two great panelists here. I'm not going to introduce them. They're going to introduce themselves because they can do a better job introducing them than I can. As you know, my name is Christopher Brown, host of the Cross-Border Interviews and Municipal. Come on in. We don't bite. Oh, there they are. So I'm going to pass it off to Ben, my first panelist, and they're going to pass it off to Meghan, and we'll get this roundtable discussion started. So, Ben.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me at this level? We're crushing this. My name is Ben Prue. I own a company called Catalyst Communications. This is kind of what we do. We work in all areas of municipal comms, crisis management, public engagement, and I am also the founder of an organization called the Canadian Association of Municipal Communicators, which was invented for the sole fact that every municipality has been trying to figure out comms and engagement and crisis management on their own. And it was about time we start bridging some of those gaps and figuring out systems together. And so between the two of them, I have lots of insights that I'll yell at you for a little bit.
All right, and I have a squeaky little chipmunk voice, so can everybody hear me? Perfect. Okay. I'm Meghan Brennan. I'm the communications manager for the town of Taber. Their first and only since 2015. So if your team is a team of one or less, I feel your pain. I know your pain. I've suffered as you do. And I'm very honored to be part of the South Zone All Hazards Incident Management Team, which sends us to deployments across the province. My most recent being the Drayton wildfire and the Jasper wildfire last year. So when I say that I understand crisis communications both municipally and when things are literally on fire, hopefully I can give you some tips and tricks that will make your organizations a lot better than I found my organization when I started.
No comment. Maybe I just gonna have to chat with the mayor of Taber for a second. Before we do get started, how many people in this room are municipal leaders or leaders of an organization? We're seeing some hands raised. Okay. Business leaders? Okay, you got two there. Okay, maybe not. First Nations? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now the second question is, how many people have a communications department in their organization? It's a... So I want to start by basically asking a general question, if you don't mind. What is the key to a successful communications department in a business or a municipality? Ben?
Somebody who knows what they're doing. We often find still that for a lot of the organizations that we work with, the communications piece is still lagging behind. And so you end up with a communications team that is born of something else within the organization. It's off the side of the desk of Legend Legal or some other department, and it's not going to do the trick anymore. The demands have risen, the expectations have risen, the complexities have risen, particularly over the last 5 years. So you're at a point now where you're actually going to be creating more costly damage to your organization by not having a dedicated communications team that's staffed appropriately by people who know what they're doing specifically within that realm is kind of the point that we're facing right now.
That's the right answer. So I'll add up more to it. Two things, a seat at the table. If you do have communications, you need to give them a seat at the table at the start. There's nothing worse from a communications perspective or a public perspective of getting the communications after a project has already started, after a decision has already been made and it's controversial. They're your voices on the ground. They're the ones hearing what the people are saying. They might understand a train coming to hit you, that you didn't even consider. So you need to give your communicators a seat at the table. And back to Ben's point, you need to have a communicator. I will say my point in my bio being better than I found it, my role was created out of huge controversy. There was a bylaw that was passed. It became international news. They realized they needed a communicator. And this job started on the back foot. So if you are going to be in that similar case, learn from Tabor and don't do those same things, and get a communicator before you get those things happening to you.
So on that note, communications is a double-edged sword. I'm assuming we all can agree to that, because you can communicate till you're blue in the face, but in my line of work, when I was a communications up in Slave Lake after the fire, because it was more reactive to creating a communications department than being proactive and having a communications department. How do you communicate effectively when you realize that not 100% of the people are going to read the message, understand the message, or even get the message to them? Because in today's world, everyone is finding that you have to communicate carte blanche in every method, every avenue, whether it be Twitter, social media and Twitter are the same thing, newspaper, radio. How do you effectively communicate in 2025 from a municipal or business perspective?
So we're actually taking a step back in how we execute those communications. When social media became more prominent and digital media became more prominent, organizations leaned really hard into those because they were easy, they were cost effective, and at the time they were well picked up upon. There's been a lot of fatigue around that, and that was exacerbated during the pandemic. And so now we're actually going the other direction, and we're working really hard to get back in front of people where they are. And so you're seeing a lot more things like mailouts. You're seeing a lot more information sessions, town halls in areas where people are already gathering. So instead of doing an open house at your rec center, you're going to do it at a cafe, or you're going to do a pop-up session at a brewery. I'm telling you, breweries make for the best engagement possible. The people who go there aren't getting drunk. They're just engaged. You do them, unless you're Chris. You do them, at the entryway of a grocery store, so you can stop people for 3 minutes before they grab their tomatoes. And so we're getting in front of people more than we used to, because we're realizing that the shift to digital has taken a back seat now. We're also losing things like traditional media, and so we have to create our own mediums to do that. And so you're seeing a lot more organizations go really proactive with things like their newsletters, doing hard copies of those again. You're seeing more organizations implement things like their public notification systems on a broader scale, because we have to reach people where they are. And so that's kind of it. People do want to be informed. We know from all of the studies around community trust right now, around where people are seeing gaps, that they're not feeling as though their voices are heard, or that their voices are incorporated into the conversation, and they're not finding information easily. And so we have to bridge that gap, because they want that info. They want to be part of the conversation. We just have to make it easier for them to do so.
Before we get Meghan, it's going to be a different question, because we're here to talk about crisis communication. You said that your job came out from a crisis, which mine did as well, and thank you. I really shouldn't say thank you to a fire, but I was paid because of a fire. But pardon me? There you go. Well, thank you for your service. 20 years in Slave Lake. Oh, we need to chat afterwards then. How do you, because municipalities are more reactive in that situation in a crisis, because you have to always be one step ahead, but you can never understand what the crisis is going to unfold. So for you, what is the best strategies that municipalities can utilize to prepare for an emergency, while understanding that you don't know what an emergency is going to come? Because sometimes an emergency could be a counselor saying something inappropriate at a council meeting, and then you're on the 6 o'clock news that night. It could be a wildfire. It could be a drought. What's the best practices that you've used and you've seen? And I know for a fact that she worked up in Drayton Valley, because I just sat with their communications person up in Drayton Valley, and she spoke wonders about Meghan, and she was the best person, the greatest person, the best person of all. Donald Trumping it right now. I apologize. So, so how do you get municipalities to be more proactive in their communications during an emergency when you don't know what that is?
So there's two things. There would be an internal component, and then there would be an external component. So for the internal component, you need to have a crisis communications plan That is a non-negotiable, and I'm sitting here as a hypocrite today because the town of Taber doesn't have one. Not an official one. There is one written. I know my processes, I have the training, all that sort of stuff, but there needs to be one that the senior leadership team, the council, the internal staff, they all know, and the minute that any crisis happens, and it needs to be flexible enough that it's not just a wildfire, it could be a controversial bylaw, it could be a protest, it could be some cataclysmic event. It needs to be flexible enough that it's going to address all of those concerns. It might not get to the minutia of it, but it will give you a start. The external component then is communicating proactively and having that trust with your citizens, with your audience. The minute that something happens, your reputation will be the thing that speaks first. So if you don't have the reputation of being forthright, being honest, being proactive, being human to the people that are asking for help in an emergency or accountability during a crisis, if you don't have that accountability, if you don't have that reputation, you're immediately on the back foot with crisis communication. So the work you actually do day by day, showing people that you're going to show up for them, you're going to answer their questions, you're going to hear their voices and incorporate them. If you don't do that work today, you're doubly lost when a crisis happens because they already don't trust you, they already think you're going to hide something, and that you're going to take forever to get them the information. So you have to do those two pieces internally and externally in order to be proactive with your communications. Because it doesn't matter what you say, it matters how you go about getting to say it.
I'm assuming most, and I hate to assume, but I'm going to do it for a second here, that most municipalities in Alberta, smaller villages, smaller towns, don't have a dedicated communications department. But smaller towns do have disasters of their own. They have emergencies of their own. How do smaller communities that don't have a dedicated individual, because some communities I've visited, there's only one person in the office, and that's their CAO, and their planning, their emergency management, their information officer, their finance, they're the whole gambit. How do you prioritize in smaller communities so you can have an effective communication strategy in the course of an emergency?
Yeah, there's a few different pieces to it. One of them being the crisis communications plan. Every organization needs one. And it should be built out to the extent that it has templated statements. It has your processes built in so that even if somebody who isn't as experienced is jumping in, at least in those initial phases of chaos, they can take a handle of the situation. The other piece is just building up your capacity with what you do have. And so really, regardless of where you are, everybody for your municipality should have ICS 100 at the very least. That'll help lay the groundwork, get it through AEMA for free. Your IO, your information officer, should have at least 200. If you can keep going to 400, great, they'll be better set up. But you are limited in capacity no matter what at that stage. And a lot of the larger emergencies that we're seeing right now, the wildfires, the floods, anything of that nature, is lasting for a longer period of time than what we were experiencing 5-10 years ago. So when that happens, you can't only rely on your team regardless of how experienced or how well trained they are, and you need to have something in place. Sometimes it's bringing somebody like myself in, sometimes it's working, to bring in others from other municipalities to have that support so that you can avoid the crisis fatigue because people hit it very quickly. We dealt with activations over the past 2 years that lasted over 100 days. Your staff cannot work 16 hours a day for 100 days. And so it's about setting yourself up, that recognizing the constraints that you do have. When things hit the fan, you're ready to adjust to that and bring in others who can help with that support as well.
They can work that much hours. You just have to pay them correctly. And as a person who is paid, I like being paid. So if you want to work me to work 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week, totally can do it. Just pay me correctly. I want to turn to social media in a crisis because that during the 2010 wildfires, social media wasn't that big, but we saw in Fort McMurray, in Drayton Valley, that the rise of social media, and that's the spot where people can get that instant gratification of what's going on the ground. Because there is a double-edged sword when it comes to social media, because you're the one source that goes out there, you're the trusted source, and there are people who might be sending things out that may not be trusted and may not be the thing that you want people to rely on. During an emergency, how do you battle back against the challenges that comes with social media while trying to build that trust with your residents and your businesses? Ben, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll use Edson as an example. Their 2023 wildfires, we came in as their communications team. They had 2 consecutive wildfire evacuations followed by a flood. So you can imagine the level of crisis fatigue in that community. We were encountered by misinformation pretty heavily on that wildfire. There were some high-level people in another order of government that were claiming arson as the cause of the fire. You can imagine when people are evacuated from their homes, how quickly they'll want to come back if they think that there's somebody trying to light their house on fire. The cause of that fire was a lightning strike. It had nothing to do with arson. Anyway, when you're in that position, you have to be beyond proactive. It's about showing that, hey, we have you every step of the way. And so your updates have to be consistent, and they have to build expectations that you then live up to. So we were doing hourly updates through multiple means, but as well as on social media. You time and date stamp everything to make sure that everybody's getting the most accurate and up-to-date information, and you incorporate resident feedback inquiries as you go, because there are going to be things that pop up in a person's brain in a crisis that are not what you would expect. Their brains wire a little bit different when there's chaos around them. So we were hearing things, the number one question that you'll hear after an evacuation is, I left my dog behind, now what? Doesn't matter what the crisis is. If they're evacuated, they will always leave their dog, and then they'll panic about it the next day. So you have to be able to address those types of things. We were getting things like, hey, I see there's a firefighter on my doorstep, because everybody has a doorbell camera now. So my house must be on fire. And then you have to walk them through, this is why you might see a firefighter on your doorstep. So you do those consistent updates. We also did twice daily live streams with the Dems and the mayors of those communities to give consistent messaging, again, built in those expectations of, this is when you can come to us. This is when you're going to hear your big updates. You'll get to ask questions at the end. And so it's about building that relationship. The misinformation will do what it does. But if you have that system built in, you can address the misinformation head on without it becoming a massive problem. It'll still be a problem, but you can cut it off early enough. And people know they can turn to you on a continuous basis.
Meghan, you talk about trust in today's world. It takes years to build trust, but it takes a second to lose that trust. How important is it to have accurate information and not just put out the most recent information? Because things are very fluid in an emergency, things are very challenging in an emergency, and while people want the information, they want to go to the reliable source. If you don't put out the correct information or the most updated information, then you can lose that trust as quickly as possible. So from your perspective and from your experiences, whether it be through Tabor or through Drayton Valley or through the other areas that you worked in, how important is it to be factually correct when you're putting out those press releases or those news updates or those live streams that Brendan was talking about?
That's a tough one because oh, great, perfect, whoo,
right at all the counselors in the room. So.
Wait, yeah, I think I know what you're going to ask. It's tough because a communicator always wants to say accurate always, and that is true. But for all of us that have been in an emergency, whether you're on the public side or internal, you know how chaotic they can be, and the wall of flame could be 30 feet and you say that, but it's actually 10 feet. It was just the information that you got at the time. So there is that very delicate balance. I would say that if you're in any sort of crisis situation, the communicator's job, whether you're an IO or just a communicator, is to kind of step back and go, okay, can I trust the source of information, and therefore can I then become the source of that information? If I release it to the public and it turns out to be wrong, what is my level of risk there? I would also probably...
Do you admit when you're wrong?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's some things that are small potatoes in the crisis world, but people don't forget when you're wrong. They're more likely to forgive in emergency situations if it's not life-threatening information, things like that. Be honest. Say, we got this information. We're sorry in this in the efforts of trying to be as quick as possible, we unfortunately messed up. This is the actual information. We'll do better going forward. And that's the key. We'll do better going forward. People are human. We're all human. The public recognizes that. So if you break down that barrier going, we're all right all the time. Nobody's all right all the time. If you tell them that, oh, I know, right? No, I'm telling you, not everybody is right all 100% of the time. If you found that person... Is this live? I'll shout it. Yeah, you have to be human, and people will forgive you your mistakes as long as you act in a better fashion moving forward. Do the best that you can. Always try to be accurate right away and immediately. But if you do make those mistakes, don't be so hard on yourself. Just do better going forward. And that gains a lot of trust. The humanity, the acknowledgement that you are fallible, that is what gains people's trust. I don't pretend to be perfect. I don't pretend that we have done everything perfectly in any crisis communications I've ever done. There's always something to be learned. It's how you act afterwards. That's how you gain people's trust.
Okay, now the real tough question comes out. Municipalities, and I know we're talking about municipalities and we're going to ask about the business and municipal relations here in 2 seconds, but municipal avenues for communications, whether it be social media, whether it be news releases, are important. But we do find ourselves in a world where everyone has access to their own Facebook account, everyone has access to their own Twitter account, everyone has access to their own social media accounts. How important is it for councillors, for mayors, to retweet, to repost the correct information coming from the municipality and not do it their own style and own method? Ben, I'll ask you because she's employed by a municipality.
Thank you.
No, that's fair. I'm going to start by saying if your community evacuates, you go with it. I'm real sick of having to kick council members out of a community. That is not my job. But I will say that you do play an integral role in getting the correct information out. And so it is sharing the information that's already coming from the organization. Now, there are a lot of council members who just want to do their best in helping, and that's always the positive intention. It's how you go about it. So if you instead of trying to stick around where your presence won't make that big of a difference, go to the evacuation center, speak to evacuees, and then relay the information back to us of, hey, these are the questions that we're hearing, and then we can give you answers. Those types of things are really helpful. Putting out the same messaging word for word that the organization puts out is really important in amplifying that message. And I'll give you an example of where we saw that go very south. There was a community during the 2023 wildfires that was evacuating at a time where the provincial system was so overwhelmed for registrations that it crashed. If your community evacuates, your residents need to register. It's so important for reasons of insurance and getting their money for all of the whatever. If they don't do that, it's going to end up in a big mess. Now, because the provincial system crashed, this municipality set up their own registration system, put the information out there publicly. The mayor went rogue, and instead of sending out that information, put out their own messaging linking back to the provincial system, which was already crashed. So many residents went to that system, saw it wasn't working, said, oh, screw it, I'll move on, and then never registered. The council member in question had a far greater reach with their misinformation than the organization did with the accurate information. Many residents were hurt because of that. It is imperative that you just share. Don't try and put it in your own words. Don't try and put your own spin on it. Just share it out because that information is verified, accurate, and up to date.
Collaboration is one of the key things that during an emergency you need to be prepared for. We talk about what happened in Edson. They worked with Woodlands County. We talk about what happened in Drayton Valley. They worked with Brazeau County. Talk about what happened in Slave Lake. They worked with Lesser Slave Lake and the Sawridge First Nations. There's many different entities that come with an emergency situation. We're only talking about natural disaster emergencies right now, and there's a range of emergencies that municipalities will have to deal with, whether it be challenges about what someone said. So we're just talking in the natural disaster sector right now for a second. what is the area that the communications person has to work with these other entities to ensure that the message that goes out is going out correctly on all of their networks as well? Because business leaders have a reach that municipalities may not have. The rural municipalities may not have a reach that the urban municipalities have. So in your time, Meghan, how important is it to work with all stakeholders during an emergency and be that conduit, so that way when you get your message out, they know that that's the message that needs to be put out, not their own message about Johnny's pet shop is on fire and that means Sally's beauty shop beside it is closed this week, so you're not going to be able to get your hair done. I apologize to Sally and John there.
For the record, the pets will be fine. They will be taken care of during an emergency. I can give you
Spiders and then
no. Sorry to the spider community. I can give you a real life example. In Jasper, I was joined at the hip with not only our liaison officer, but every third party organization you can imagine. Fortis, Ellis Dawn, companies that are equally important. I've just forgotten their names, so apologies to them. And there were 8 of us at any given time in Jasper, so you can imagine how busy it was. And so the importance of making sure that your messages are standard, correct, and everybody's following the same party line is crucial. I'll give you a really good example. When the re-entry happened in Jasper, people were coming either to a home that was burned, or a home that was partially damaged, or a home that was still standing. Now, the utilities were affected and the utilities were shut off. So we knew that gas was going to be a big deal and we didn't want to start another crisis within the crisis if people go back into their homes that think they're fine and they're flipping on the gas. Huge thing. That was immediately identified in one of the meetings. And the IO sat together and the crisis communications staff of Fortis and ATCO sat together and went, okay, how are we going to do this messaging for utilities? Because it has to be right, it has to be quick, and it has to be something very easy for the public to follow, because the public is upset. They don't have the emotional capacity anymore. They don't have the brain capacity anymore to deal with it. So to work with those organizations and those cooperating agencies right away it's not should we, it is a must. If you don't know who your cooperating agencies are, find your liaison officer immediately and find that they'll have a list of 1 million people that have been phoning them off the hook. Tow truck companies seem to be a big one in Jasper. Don't ask me why, but anyways. But we worked with all of them. And the nice thing that it does too is it takes a lot of pressure off you, because these big organizations, now I'm picking on the utility companies, but they're these multi-billion-dollar corporations, they've gone through all of this. They've done it. They've got all the templates. They've got all the wordage. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Work with them. And that's just incorporated it into your message. So not only does it save you time, but it makes sure you're all on the same page. And I can't begin to tell you how many Jasper residents we got saying, thank you, this was super easy. It was one to 5 steps. It was one less thing we had to think about in a million things that we're now going to have to face in the coming days. Utilize the amount of people that you have, utilize every single one of them, because you're one resource. You can't do it alone, but you can do it together, and you have to do it together.
Last area I want to just talk about before we open it up to the questions from the floor is, hi, come on in. We don't bite. Hey, no worries, Bill. I want to talk. I want to talk about the aftermaths of a crisis, because we always think about the here and now, what's going on during, but you have to start looking at the aftermath as well, because people are going to be looking at, like you said, what's the utilities? Do I open up my fridge? Do I have to put it out on the sidewalk? Because some people, the power gets turned off, that food is ranted and that fridge is gone. How important has it been to have a good proactive communication strategy after a fire, after a disaster as well? Because we always think about, after the fire's done, no one's going to listen to us, so they're going to just go about their business, but they're still going to want to get that information from the source that they've been getting it through the emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. Crisis communications doesn't end when the quote-unquote crisis ends. It ends when everything's back to normal, which it likely won't be for a very long time in a major situation. You know, it's the same as an EOC doesn't stand down the day that re-entry occurs after an evacuation. So you have to have a plan in place to welcome everybody back, to make sure that they understand, you know, what's going on, how it impacts them, utilities, road blockages, how their homes are impacted, all of these different pieces, because they're coming in blind and they just do want to get back to their regular lives. You have to be able to balance that with giving them some sense of normalcy, which can be very difficult. But we've dealt with experiences where your crisis communications continue for months after the event ends. Jasper is actually a good example of that, where it was ongoing for a very, very long time. And in BC, we had one that we were still executing crisis comms for about 4.5, 5 months after they had a re-entry from a wildfire. So it's depending on the situation, it can be, you know, reduced over time, but you still have to address the fact that there's fire impacted homes, areas of your community still might not be safe, infrastructure will be damaged for a very long time. So there are these extended pieces that don't just go away overnight. And that'll be part of your crisis communications plan if it's built out properly.
Thank you. Okay, so just looking at the time, we got about 10 minutes. So does anyone have any questions for the table before I ask my last question to the panelists, I should say? I'm smart. Anyone have any questions? Going once. Oh, we have a question right down front. Hi.
Hi, Erin Crane, Tourism Lethbridge. So one of the things I think we learned out of the Jasper fire recently, especially in the tourism world, is the importance of being involved in that communication plan. So that is my question to you on kind of behalf of the organizations in your community. I'm surrounded here by the downtown, the Chamber of Commerce. We've got economic development over there. How do we start those conversations with our municipality about being involved in that communication plan and the role that we play?
Who wants Megan?
Sure.
Oh, she was excited.
I was excited for that one.
She looked like she knew this question was coming.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Sure. Wink, nudge.
Start now. Don't do it during an emergency, because everybody, that's the easy answer. I think everybody knows that. But with full respect to what these organizations do, in an emergency, you're thinking about life safety and property. You're not thinking about the tourism stuff. If you're, like Ben said, if you're good, you will consider that eventually, but right off the hop, you're not considering that. And it's just a mental load that you don't want to deal with. We'll deal with tourism later. We'll deal with the businesses later, that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily the best way of handling it, but you're just trying to triage an entire mountain of paper and get through it. So what I'd recommend is going to your municipalities, going to these organizations now and saying, okay, in these situations, what plans do you have? What is your emergency management plan for your municipality? What's your evacuation plan? Is it different for businesses versus residents? Some municipalities have it different, some don't. What do you need from our business or our organization in that situation? So utilities would have a different request than tourism would, or secondary industries, pharmacies, things like that. The quicker, my mentor told me once, do everything during peacetime. So during wartime, you don't have to worry about it. It's less to think about. So if you do it now and you have those plans now, then your lizard brain just kicks in and those plans get done. So that's what I would recommend, doing it now. Jasper had a few of those in place, and it worked out very, very well for them. And you will see the fruits of that come to fruition in this coming summer.
Yeah, I would just add that it's such a difficult balance to strike if it is a situation like Jasper where there are fire impacted homes. I was part of the team that developed the recovery framework for Jasper, and what we were finding was, one of the main pieces of it is how do we get our tourism back? I mean, they evacuated 20,000 people, fewer than 5,000 of those were residents. So they need that tourism to get their economy going. The problem is you've welcomed back all these people who came home to devastation. So how do you balance respecting their privacy, respecting the fact that, there are disaster tourists out there who want to come and see the damage too that you want to avoid, while still bringing back people to see and rejuvenate the community? It's really difficult. And so, working hand in hand is really key.
Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, I should add on that statement as well, just before we go to the last question. Sometimes you have to walk into the municipal office and actually introduce yourself, because I got enough emails that I don't need to try to figure out who you are during an emergency. So that sometimes that face-to-face goes a little bit further than actually that email or that phone call, because I'm just looking at Jen right now and saying, Jen, is that right? Okay. So I would just say, also have that face-to-face conversation, because during an emergency, the last thing I want to try and do is do the small talk and try to get to know someone and talk about how you are, because I need to go do that other situation. So last question, anyone? Oh, we're way in the back.
Just more of a comment.
Oh.
Just on the disaster recovery stuff, for businesses. So we know that the business side is left off a lot of the times in the plans, and we know that, right? Like, first is lives and health, so we know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can recover faster, then your whole community recovers faster and everything. So Community Futures is in the middle of a provincial-wide project about business disaster recovery. Unfortunately, the Clinton Jasper office was the ones with the lead on it, so now we're going to have some real-life examples of things that we should have in place before. So just keep an eye out for some of that, and we're just looking for some easy things that small towns can adopt and give to their businesses. Like, these are things that you should be prepping before, so that when we have a disaster, hopefully we have some of these things in place. So just a comment.
Sorry, and you are?
Community Futures.
Your name? Is your name Community Futures? Because I can introduce you as Community.
Community Futures Process Pass.
Okay.
Great disasters as well as Process Pass.
Yes. And then sometimes, and as I said, it's not always a natural disaster. It can be a major challenge as well, whether it be the coal industry in Crow's Nest Pass. I can imagine you're having a great time. So before we go, because it was just a comment, does anyone have a quick question? Go, way in the back.
So it's another Sasha, but not from Calgary's past. I'm with Cities Data Platform for Economic Development. So we work with mostly economic developers across Canada, and in our work we came across a number of success stories where economic developers and communications department work together. So I'm not talking about emergencies. I want to finish on a positive note. So where communications department is working together with economic developers on basically communicating the advantages of the community, and I don't know whether it's community profile or anything. So what is your experience? The question is either for Ben or Meghan. Your experience in working with, for example, economic development departments on communicating the advantages of the community, whatever that may be, and how much do you rely on data?
Okay, so we have 3 minutes to answer that question. So a minute and a half each, and that's not including my wrap up. So you have like 45 seconds, because I'm eating into the time as I continue to talk. Ben, go for it.
I would just say that any economic development or investment strategy really needs a basis of communications. It's great to know everything that's going on. It's great to know all the data, everything that people need to know. If you can't get it out there, it's kind of useless. And so we do see a lot of communities that still lack that piece, where they develop all of these great plans, great documents, and then just throw them on the website and hope people see them. So it is about working collaboratively to get that information out. And we've seen it done well. We've seen it done terribly. We worked with an organization called the Battle River Economic Opportunities Commission. It was coal diversification. And the idea being, how do we get this out across areas that aren't already aware of what's going on here? So it did require a full communication strategy that I would say took on a bigger life than even the economic development portion did. So it depends on the situation, but the collaboration is key.
I'll keep this short and sweet. If you're a municipality that doesn't have communications resources, everybody throws their resources at economic development, so it's in your power then to create resources for communications, whether that's hiring contractors, marketing firms, throwing some budget at the communications person that's doing it off the side of their desk. Use your powers for good on behalf of communications. If you want that help, use the resources, because councils understand giving money to economic development. It's a lot harder sell to give to communications. So if you want want to work together, throwing a few resources is a great way to get more in your pocket and in your corner.
So again, money. Ben, Megan, thank you so much. For you who sat down for the last hour and chatted with us and listened to us talk about crisis communications, thank you so much for doing this. I think there's like a 5 to 10 minute break, if I'm not mistaken, between now and the next session. I think it starts at 10:25, 11:25. 11:30, so you have 10 minutes to run back, use the washroom, go walk the dog, and